The white Mercedes GLE came across the cornfield like a comet burning toward Earth. No brakes, full throttle, the morning frost on dormant stalks, turning to mist under spinning tires. Barrett Thornton stood beside his combine harvester, 52 years of Nebraska winters, carved into the lines around his eyes, and watched the luxury vehicle accelerate toward 18,000 pounds of stationary steel. The sound when metal met metal was less a crash than a violent folding, the Mercedes accordion crumpling around the rear wheel assembly, while airbags detonated with percussive force that echoed across frozen fields. Steam hissed from the shattered radiator, white powder billowed through the destroyed windshield, and for 3 seconds the world held its breath. Victoria Ashford stumbled from the driver's side, one heel broken, mascara already streaking down her cheeks, phone pressed to her ear before her knees stopped shaking. Her voice cut through the diesel-scented air with the hysteria of someone who'd just driven $60,000 into an immovable object and still believed she was the victim. Arrest him. He's trespassing on HOA land. Send someone now. End. Deputy Cole Richardson sat in his patrol car 50 yards away on the public road, shoulder hand already on his radio, watching the entire scene unfold with the resigned expression of a man who'd been expecting exactly this for the past 3 weeks. Barrett didn't move from where he stood, boots planted in the freshly harvested row dirt under his fingernails from that morning's equipment checked the smell of cut corn and cold November air surrounding him like armor. Behind him, his daughter Grace held her camera steady. 5-year-old Rosalind secured in the truck 60 feet back and across the fence line. Dan Peterson's 3 mounted cameras recorded every frame of what would become the most expensive temper tantrum in Webster County history. The second she hit my tractor, she gave me everything I needed to end this. She just didn't know it yet. But the story didn't start with a crash. It started 3 years earlier with lavender soap and a promise Barrett made to a dying woman in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and the particular kind of despair that comes when doctors stop using the word remission. The oncologist's office at Lincoln Regional Medical Center had that specific quality of light that made bad news feel inevitable, fluorescent tubes humming overhead, while Dr. Patricia Haynes pulled up imaging scans that showed constellation patterns of metastases across Evelyn Thornton's liver and lungs. Barrett sat in the plastic chair beside his wife, their hands clasped together the way they'd been clasped for 24 years through late-night colic walks and farm auction losses, and that terrible spring when the flooding took 40 acres of topsoil, and they'd eaten nothing but eggs and canned vegetables for 3 months straight. Evelyn's fingers felt thinner than they had last week, bones pronounced through skin that bruised too easily now, but her grip was still strong. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, 3 to 6 months. We can try palliative chemotherapy, but given the spread, we're looking at quality of life over cure. Barrett heard the words through a strange underwater distance, his vision narrowing to Evelyn's profile as she absorbed her death sentence with the same calm she'd brought to every crisis they'd weathered together. She asked the practical questions while he forgot how to breathe. Pain management protocols, hospice referrals, what symptoms to watch for as her body began its final surrender. They walked to the truck in silence, the October sun too bright against the hospital's white exterior, everything ordinary and impossible at once. Evelyn cried only once that night in their bedroom, face pressed into the pillow she'd embroidered with sunflowers back when Grace was in kindergarten and Callan was still learning to walk. Barrett held her, feeling each sob shake through her diminishing frame, and knew with absolute certainty that he would trade every acre, every dollar, every breath in his lungs if it would buy her one more spring. But cancer doesn't bargain, and by morning Evelyn had wiped her face, braided her thinning hair, and walked downstairs to make coffee with hands that only trembled when she thought no one was looking. The lavender garden was her idea, planted that November with bulbs she ordered from a catalog that promised French cultivar stock and instructions for Nebraska's Zone 5 climate. Barrett helped her dig the beds along the south fence line, turning soil already hardening with pre-winter frost while Evelyn explained her vision. 20 feet of grosso and phenomenal varieties interspersed with Russian sage and catmint. For contrast, the whole arrangement designed to bloom purple and silver from June through September. She worked slowly, taking frequent breaks to catch her breath, but her hands in the dirt carried the same determination that had built this farm from an inheritance of debt and stubborn land into something worth passing to the next generation. This is for you. When I'm gone, something alive to tend. Barrett's throat closed, but he kept digging, kept following her gentle directions about spacing and drainage, kept pretending they were planting a garden and not a living memorial. The bulbs went into frozen ground like small promises dormant through the winter that would take her. She made him swear 3 things before she died. First, keep the farm. Second, make sure Grace and Callan understood that land wasn't just property, but story, every furrow and fence post holding memory of the people who'd worked it. Third, tend the lavender garden every year because devotion meant showing up even when the person you were devoted to no longer could. Evelyn Thornton died on a Tuesday morning in late March. Daffodils just breaking through soil around the farmhouse foundation, the hospice nurse noting the time as 6:47, while Barrett held his wife's hand and watched her chest rise and fall and finally gently stop. The lavender garden sat empty and brown, waiting for a spring Evelyn would never see. The bulldozers arrived at the Polson farm in June of 2019, massive yellow caterpillars that made the earth shake when they rolled off the flatbed trailers. Barrett stood at his fence line with Evelyn, both of them watching as Cornerstone Development's crew began the methodical demolition of everything Bill Polson had spent 73 years building. The barn went first, that beautiful post and beam structure Bill's grandfather had raised in 1947 with a crew of neighbors and a hand-drawn blueprint he'd sketched on butcher paper. The wrecking ball swung once, twice, and century-old timber exploded into kindling, the sound like the world cracking open. Evelyn's hand found his. That could be us someday if we're not careful. The cancer diagnosis was still 4 months away, but she already understood what Barrett was only beginning to grasp. Development didn't stop at property lines. It crept, it pressured, it offered money that looked good on paper until you realized you'd sold the only thing that couldn't be replaced. 300 acres of prime agricultural land became a construction site, concrete trucks and framing crews, and the particular violence of turning farmland into subdivision lots. Within 6 weeks, the dust was so thick Barrett couldn't see his own barn from the kitchen window. Ron Castellano from Cornerstone knocked on their door in August, a decent man in an indecent position, carrying blueprints that showed utility easement corridors running straight through the northeast corner of Thornton land. Barrett invited him in for coffee while Evelyn served pie that neither man touched, and Ron laid out the offer, $20,000 for a permanent easement to run water, sewer, and electrical lines from the county trunk to the new development. Barrett looked at Evelyn, saw her mind already 3 moves ahead. Give us $1 instead. Ron's confusion was almost comical, his pen hovering over paperwork as he tried to parse whether this was negotiation tactic or elaborate joke. Evelyn explained it with the patient clarity she'd once used teaching their children long division. They didn't need $20,000, but they needed ironclad legal protection. $1 created a contract. $1 meant intent consideration binding agreement. And most importantly, $1 with the right language meant Cornerstone acknowledged this was an easement and nothing more. No jurisdiction transfer, no authority over anything beyond the specific utility corridor, no HOA governance extending 1 inch onto Thornton land ever. Ron called his lawyer. The lawyer called Evelyn and Barrett's lawyer Warren Hayes, who'd been handling farm business since Barrett's father was alive and knew exactly how to write a contract that said what it meant and meant what it said. The document took 3 weeks to draft, every clause weighed and tested, every contingency mapped. Barrett read it twice. Evelyn read it 4 times, and Warren read it 7 times before declaring it bulletproof. The easement grants right-of-way for specified utilities only and confers no governance authority, assessment power, or regulatory jurisdiction to Prairie Meadows Estates, Homeowners Association, or any successor organization over lands described as Thornton Family Farm in perpetuity. They signed in September. Ron Castellano handed over a crisp $1 bill with George Washington's stern face looking appropriately serious about the transaction, and Evelyn went straight to the kitchen to find a frame. The dollar went on the wall beside the wedding photo, and the kids' school pictures, a strange addition to family history that nevertheless felt exactly right. Best investment we ever made. or so we thought. The Prairie Meadows development rose through fall and winter. 200 homes starting at $750,000, each one a monument to the particular aesthetic that developers called modern farmhouse, and actual farmers called whatever rich people think a barn looks like. 3-car garages, professional landscaping irrigation systems more complex than anything Barrett used on his crops, and an HOA with bylaws thicker than the Farmer's Almanac, and twice as prescriptive about what you could plant, paint, or park in your own driveway. Barrett didn't care. Not his circus, not his monkeys, not his problem. He had corn to plant and a wife fighting cancer, and the particular blessing of land owned free and clear since 1997, no bank breathing down his neck, no payments, stealing sleep. The McMansions went up, the families moved in, and Thornton Farm kept doing what it had done since 1952, growing corn, raising chickens, donating 30% of every harvest to the regional food bank because Evelyn believed that having enough meant helping people who didn't. Then Victoria Ashford arrived in August of 2020, and the trouble began. The moving truck was the first warning sign, a massive semi that blocked half of County Road 14, while professional movers unloaded furniture that looked expensive even from a distance. Barrett was fixing fence that afternoon, replacing rotted posts along the property line closest to Prairie Meadows, and couldn't help noticing the white Mercedes that pulled up behind the moving truck with California plates still attached. The woman who emerged wore athleisure clothing that probably cost more than his monthly grocery budget designer sunglasses, despite the overcast sky and the kind of haircut that required standing appointments to maintain. Victoria Ashford. 58 years old, transplanted from the Bay Area, married to Richard, who worked remotely in tech and might as well have been a ghost for how rarely anyone saw him. No children, plenty of money, and the air of someone accustomed to being in charge of things, whether invited to be or not. Barrett nodded politely when she glanced his direction, received a tight smile in return, and went back to driving fence posts into hard August ground. He thought nothing more of it until the following spring, when Evelyn died in late March, and Victoria appeared at the farmhouse door with a casserole dish and an expression that managed to convey both genuine condolence and faint distaste for the peeling paint on the porch steps. "I'm so sorry for your loss. I know we haven't properly met, but I wanted to bring something." The casserole was chicken tetrazzini, homemade and still warm, the kind of gesture that came from a good impulse, even if the execution felt slightly performative. Barrett accepted it with numb gratitude, the fog of fresh grief making every interaction feel like watching himself from a distance. Victoria lingered on the porch, glancing at the barn visible across the yard, the chicken coop with its faded red paint, the gravel driveway that hadn't been resurfaced in a decade. "If you ever need anything, I'm just over the fence line. We're all neighbors here. Thank you. That's kind." She left, and Barrett thought that was the end of it. What he didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Victoria Ashford had spent 6 years and $90,000 trying to become a mother through IVF, that every cycle had failed, that her marriage to Richard had frozen into polite cohabitation. Somewhere around the 4th miscarriage that she'd moved to Nebraska to start over, and found only more emptiness in a subdivision full of families she would never have. What he couldn't see was that Victoria looked at Thornton Farm with its multi-generational legacy and children who'd grown up in those fields and felt something acidic and resentful bloom in her chest, something that tasted like her own failures reflected back through someone else's success. But on that March afternoon with Evelyn, 3 days in the ground, and Barrett too hollowed out to notice subtle signs of future conflict, Victoria was just a neighbor offering food in a crisis. He ate the casserole, washed the dish, and returned it with thanks a week later. Prairie Meadows held its annual meeting in May. Victoria ran for HOA president. She won by comfortable margin, running on a platform of maintaining community standards and property values, and by summer she'd already sent her first round of violation notices to residents whose decorations or vehicles or lawn ornaments exceeded approved specifications. Barrett heard the stories through Dan Peterson, his neighbor on the opposite side, whose vegetable operation had weathered its own HOA assault 2 years prior. Victoria fined a veteran $200 for parking his work truck in his own driveway overnight because commercial vehicles violated aesthetic guidelines. She made a young couple repaint their shutters because the beige was 2 shades off the approved palette. She brought a tape measure to someone's yard to prove their garden gnome exceeded the 12-inch decorative item limit. Power corrupts quickly when there's no purpose behind it except control itself. Barrett stayed out of it, tending Evelyn's garden through the summer and fall, watching the lavender bloom for the first time since she'd planted it, purple and silver waves that made the air smell like the soap she'd used and the promises she'd extracted. The McMansions kept their manicured lawns. He kept his working farm, and the property line between them might as well have been a border between countries for all the interaction they had. Until the letter arrived in June of 2022, certified mail with Prairie Meadows HOA letterhead and 2 pages of demands that made Barrett read it 3 times before he could believe someone had actually written it. The letter sat on the kitchen table where Evelyn used to pay bills, her reading glasses still in the drawer beside the checkbook she'd last balanced 4 months before the cancer took her ability to focus on numbers. Barrett stood at the window overlooking her lavender garden, now in its 2nd full bloom since her death. Purple flowers moving in the wind like something alive and breathing. The letter's words burned in his peripheral vision even as he tried to ignore them. Your agricultural operation constitutes a visual blight inconsistent with Prairie Meadows community standards. Required remediation within 90 days, privacy hedge installation, driveway, paving, barn repainting. Estimated total cost, $60,000. Barrett read it twice, felt laughter bubble up from somewhere deep and bitter, then read it again as the laughter died into something colder. Victoria Ashford genuinely believed she had authority over land his family had owned for 70 years. She'd either never looked at the easement agreement or assumed HOA jurisdiction extended beyond subdivision boundaries through sheer force of her will and an elected position that carried exactly 0 legal weight over property she didn't govern. He walked to the recycling bin, dropped the letter in with the junk mail and expired grocery circulars, and went back to work. That was his first mistake, though. He wouldn't realize it for another 2 weeks, when his phone rang and a woman's voice asked if he had a minute to talk about agricultural blight and environmental hazards. Kate Mitchell from the Lincoln Journal-Star sounded young and skeptical in equal measure, her questions carrying the tone of someone who'd been handed a story that didn't quite add up but needed verification before dismissing it entirely. Victoria Ashford had contacted the newsroom claiming Thornton Farm created pesticide runoff, rodent infestation, and unsanitary conditions that threatened neighboring property values. She was holding an emergency HOA meeting that evening, and invited press coverage wanted public attention on what she called unregulated agricultural operations near residential areas. Barrett set down the wrench he'd been using to replace a fan belt on his tractor, wiped grease from his hands onto a shop rag that had been white sometime in the previous decade, and took a breath before responding. "Ma'am, I run organic. Have for 12 years. No synthetic pesticides. The USDA certification is current. As for rodents, I've got barn cats and chickens. That's how farms work." Pause on the other end, the sound of typing. That's not what Mrs. Ashford told us. Mrs. Ashford wouldn't know a combine from a riding mower. Kate Mitchell laughed, genuine amusement cutting through professional distance. "Can I come see your operation? I'd like to verify before tonight's meeting." She arrived 2 hours later, a compact woman in her early 30s with a camera bag and the observant eyes of someone who'd learned to spot when stories didn't match reality. Barrett walked her through the fields, corn standing 7 feet tall and rustling in the afternoon breeze, cover crops thick between rows to prevent erosion. Everything maintained with the careful attention that came from treating land like legacy instead of commodity. He showed her his USDA organic certification, current since 2011, framed and mounted in the barn beside his Audubon Society Wildlife Habitat Award. Kate photographed the certification, the fields, the barn that Victoria called a blight, and then she showed Barrett her phone screen. The images made his stomach drop. Someone had digitally altered photos of his property, making the red barn paint look rotten and peeling, adding impossible sag to fence lines that were perfectly straight, inserting trash piles and rusted junk that existed nowhere except in Photoshop's imagination. The worst image showed Evelyn's lavender garden looking dead and neglected. The purple blooms turned brown. the careful beds made to appear overgrown with weeds. She distributed these at last month's HOA meeting, claimed they were current photos documenting deteriorating conditions. The anger came slow, like water rising in a locked room, cold and inexorable. Barrett had survived equipment failures and bank loans, and hail that destroyed entire crops, and the particular agony of watching his wife die in incremental stages. He didn't lose his temper easily. But this was different. This was someone lying about land his grandfather had cleared with his own hands, lying about the garden Evelyn planted, knowing she'd never see it bloom. "Can you send me those already in your inbox? Mr. Thornton, this isn't blight. This is cleaner than most suburban lawns I've seen." Kate attended Victoria's meeting that night while Barrett stayed home, fed his chickens with the rhythmic scatter of feed hitting dry dirt, and waited. The farmhouse felt too quiet without Evelyn, her absence still sharp-edged after 15 months, but the lavender garden outside held the last light of evening and smelled exactly the way she'd promised it would. Devotion and calm, she'd said. The article went live the next morning with a headline that changed everything. Local farmer battles HOA overreach organic operation. Targeted, despite 0 violations. Kate had written it fair and detailed, including Barrett's certifications, the Audubon Award, and the critical fact that county records showed his property completely outside HOA jurisdiction per the 2019 easement agreement. She mentioned the photoshopped images with the careful neutrality of a journalist who wanted readers to draw their own conclusions. The comments section exploded, hundreds of people defending Barrett sharing their own HOA horror stories. By noon, the article had 4,000 Facebook shares. Barrett sat at his kitchen table with coffee going cold, watching the numbers climb and feeling something he hadn't felt since Evelyn died. Vindication, yes, but also the strange sensation of being seen. His phone started ringing. People from Prairie Meadows he'd never met apologizing, explaining they'd been misled. Tim Brennan, a contractor who lived 3 streets deep in the subdivision, called with embarrassment thick in his voice. "Mr. Thornton, I'm sorry. She showed us those photos. I didn't know she was lying." "Not your fault. You trusted your HOA president. That's reasonable." The calls continued through the afternoon, each one a small crack in Victoria's foundation of control. What Barrett didn't know was that Victoria sat in her McMansion, watching the article spread and feeling her carefully constructed authority collapse in real time. She'd moved to Nebraska to build something to matter in some measurable way, to fill the void left by children she'd never have, and a marriage that had died everything except the paperwork. The HOA presidency was supposed to give her purpose. Instead, it had given her public humiliation. Victoria went silent for 3 days. Then on day 4, a cease and desist letter arrived from her attorney demanding Barrett issue a public apology for providing false information to media. Barrett read it standing at his mailbox, the same cold anger from before settling into his bones like winter frost. He called Warren Hayes. Warren answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the relaxed cadence of semi-retirement, interrupted by something more interesting than another estate planning consultation. "Warren, need you to read something." Barrett scanned the letter and emailed it while Warren waited on the line. 30 seconds of silence, then laughter so hard Warren couldn't catch his breath. "Barrett, this might be the dumbest cease and desist I've seen in 4 decades of practice. That bad. She's threatening defamation for telling the truth. You learn in first-year law school that truth is a complete defense. You can't lose a defamation case if what you said is factually accurate. And she has 0 legal authority over your land. The easement contract we drafted makes that bulletproof. Her attorney should be embarrassed. So what do I do? Let me respond." And Barrett posts that easement agreement on Facebook. It's public record. People should see what they're dealing with. Warren's response letter was surgical and devastating, 3 pages of professional courtesy wrapped around an absolute evisceration of Victoria's legal position. He laid out the facts. No defamation occurred because Barrett's statements were demonstrably true. Victoria possessed no jurisdiction over Thornton property per recorded documents. Further harassment would result in a counterclaim. Barrett posted the easement agreement that afternoon, scanning the original document and uploading it with a simple caption. For anyone confused about property lines, here's the legal document. Survey map attached, 2,000 shares within 24 hours just from Prairie Meadows residents alone. The subdivision split along predictable lines. 30% still backed Victoria either from genuine agreement or fear. 50% stayed quiet, terrified. But 20% started speaking up, forming a group called Reasonable Residents and sharing their own stories. Garrett Whitmore, the HOA treasurer and an accountant by profession, posted a simple financial review. We've spent $11,000 in 6 months on legal consultation. Nobody voted on this. Where's the money going? Victoria started deleting comments, blocking members, and issuing violation notices to residents who'd publicly questioned her authority. By late August, Barrett had gone from invisible farmer to accidental folk hero, and Victoria had gone from confident autocrat to cornered adversary with everything to lose. The harvest was still 3 months away. Victoria's desperation was just beginning. And in Evelyn's lavender garden, the purple blooms kept growing, indifferent to human conflict, devoted only to the sun and soil and the memory of the woman who'd planted them as a final gift to the man she loved. Victoria's counterattack began with bureaucracy, the weapon of people who'd learned that official letterhead carried authority even when the complaints behind it held none. The first arrived on a Tuesday morning in early September. Nebraska Department of Motor Vehicles seal embossed across the top, alleging his farm equipment violated permit requirements. Barrett called his equipment dealer, a man named Marcus, who knew the regulatory landscape better than most DMV inspectors. Marcus, do I need permits to move my combine on Route 34? Laughter crackled through the phone. Barrett, you've been farming 30 years. Farm equipment under 25 miles per hour is exempt, state law since the 70s. Why, someone thinks she's the DMV now. The inspector arrived anyway, checked Barrett's equipment, and dismissed the complaint in 10 minutes. Off the record, Tom Vasquez mentioned this was the third bogus call that month from the same HOA president. The pattern was being documented. Same week, the county health department called about chicken coop complaints. Deshaun Porter inspected, found 0 violations, and showed Barrett the complaint log. 6 complaints in 4 months, all from Victoria Ashford, all dismissed. Mr. Thornton, people who file this many false complaints don't stop on their own. You should document everything. After he left, Barrett ordered 4 game cameras from Amazon. $300 felt like cheap insurance. The cameras went up that weekend, mounted on fence posts with clear sight lines and surveillance signs, making the recording obvious and legal. 2 weeks later, the cameras paid for themselves. The motion alert came at 6:07 on a September morning. Barrett pulled up footage on his phone, watching a figure move along his property line with measuring tape. Richard Ashford, Victoria's ghost of a husband, documenting fence positions with methodical attention. 16 minutes later, a different camera caught a woman Barrett didn't recognize standing on his gravel driveway with a professional camera photographing the chicken coop from 15 feet inside his property boundary. Clear trespassing. Barrett downloaded everything, backed it up, and called the sheriff's non-emergency line. Deputy Cole Richardson showed up that afternoon. Barrett showed him the footage. You want to press charges? Not yet. File a report, get it documented, but I'd rather warn them first. I'm not trying to ruin anyone. That's generous, Mr. Thornton. Cole visited Victoria and Richard. Victoria claimed they had a right to verify boundaries because Barrett's fence was encroaching. Richard apologized. Victoria didn't. Keep those cameras running. The phone call to Dan Peterson was overdue by about 3 years. Barrett had avoided asking for help raised to handle his own problems. But patterns repeated, and Victoria's playbook looked too familiar to ignore. Dan, it's Barrett. You got time to talk about our mutual neighbor problem? Silence stretched long enough that Barrett thought the line had dropped. Victoria Ashford, yeah, come over. Come. Dan's kitchen table was covered in folders, 47 letters from Victoria spanning 18 months. Irrigation noise complaints, privacy fence, demands agricultural odor threats. Dan had fought it all, spent $4,000 in legal fees, won decisively. The judge had warned Victoria about frivolous litigation. She tried to declare my property a nuisance. Cost me everything I'd saved for my daughter's wedding. Why did she stop? Dan pulled out an offer letter from 2 years prior. Private offer on his land 60% below market value. Dan declined. Complaints started 1 week later. Barrett. She's not trying to get compliance. She's trying to force sales. Harassment drops. Property values creates opportunities for acquisition. Barrett drove home as sunset painted the sky, his mind working through implications. Victoria wasn't just a control freak. She was something more dangerous. Someone who'd mistaken authority for identity and couldn't separate enforcing rules from destroying anyone who challenged her. Grace called on a Thursday evening in late September, her voice carrying across the miles from Chicago with concern that made Barrett realize how much he'd been downplaying the situation. "Dad, I read the article. All of it. Why didn't you tell me it was this bad? Didn't want to burden you. Mom would be so mad at you for saying that." The truth hit harder than expected, Evelyn's voice echoing with clarity. "I'm coming home. Mark can handle things here for a long weekend. Rosalind's never really seen the farm anyway, not properly. Grace, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. Because you taught me that family shows up." They arrived Friday evening. Grace's sensible sedan pulling into the gravel driveway with Rosalind already bouncing in her car seat, 5 years old and crackling with energy. Barrett met them on the porch, felt his daughter's arms around him in a hug that communicated more than words, then knelt to catch his granddaughter. "Grandpa Bear, Mommy says we're helping you." Barrett laughed for the first time in weeks, genuine amusement breaking through accumulated stress. He carried Rosalind toward the lavender garden, Grace following, watching his granddaughter's wonder at the purple flowers. Grandma planted these before she went to heaven. She wanted beautiful things to keep growing. Rosalind touched the lavender stalks with careful fingers. "Can we make soap like Grandma used to?" Barrett looked at Grace, saw her eyes wet. "Yeah, sweetheart. We can make soap." That evening they sat in the kitchen where 3 generations of Thorntons had eaten dinner. Normal life, domestic and precious everything, Victoria's harassment threatened to disrupt. After Rosalind went to bed, mother and daughter sat on the porch while September crickets sang. "Dad, you can't let her win. Not just because of the property, but because of what this place means. What Mom wanted it to mean." "I know. Then let me help. I took 2 weeks off. We're here, and we're not leaving until this is handled." Grace's determination carried Evelyn's steel, wrapped in softer packaging. Barrett nodded, feeling isolation transform into something more sustainable. "Your mother would have handled Victoria in about 15 minutes, probably with lemonade and absolute clarity about boundaries. Then let's do it her way. With grace. But also with documentation." The harassment intensified through October. Grace documented everything, her photographer's eye capturing images that told stories, county inspectors leaving with dismissive waves, the pristine chicken coop Victoria claimed was hazardous survey stakes, proving property lines. She made it a game for Rosalind, calling it detective work, and her daughter took to the task with enthusiasm. Barrett installed final cameras with Grace's help, explaining sightlines, while his daughter asked questions that showed she'd been paying attention to legal implications. Rosalind handed tools from her toy toolbox, convinced she was helping. The trespassing footage came on a cold morning when October was sliding toward November. Richard Ashford appeared again, this time with Victoria's sister Lynette visiting from California. They measured, photographed, documented with intensity. Grace watched the footage over Barrett's shoulder. "Dad, she looks desperate, not angry. Desperate. Desperate people are dangerous, or broken, like you were after Mom." The observation stung because it was accurate. Barrett remembered those first months when grief had made him simultaneously fragile and hostile. He'd survived by farming. Victoria had survived by grasping for control. Maybe. But understanding why someone's hurting you doesn't mean you let them keep doing it. No, but it means you don't become like them when you stop them. Cole Richardson's report was filed by afternoon. The sheriff's notation recommended Victoria cease all property line verification without legal authority or face potential stalking charges. The fence posts appeared 3 days later. Barrett discovered them while checking the Southfield 6 wooden fence posts, brand new and painted white, driven into the ground in a precise line. Each post stood 6 feet tall, professionally installed, positioned exactly 15 feet inside his legal property boundary. He walked the line slowly, checking each post. Fresh dirt around the bases indicated recent installation, probably that morning. The wood was treated pine quality material, and the spacing suggested professional survey work. Barrett called Grace Sullivan, the county surveyor who'd handled his assessment in 2019. "Grace, I need an emergency resurvey. Someone just installed fence posts on my property claiming it's theirs." She arrived within 2 hours, professional equipment loaded in her vehicle, and began methodical confirmation. GPS coordinates checked against county records, measurements taken with laser precision. "Mr. Thornton, these posts are 14 feet 7 inches inside your property line. Whoever installed them committed criminal mischief. I can have a certified report ready by tomorrow morning." "Do that." Barrett already suspected, but confirmation came when he called Greenscape Solutions. The owner, Mike, answered, sounding harried. "Greenscape, this is Mike." "Mike, this is Barrett Thornton. You did fence post installation this morning. Those posts are 15 feet inside my property." Silence stretched long enough that Barrett thought he'd lost the connection. "Oh, Jesus. She told us it was HOA common land. Showed us a plat map. Her map was wrong. Mr. Thornton, we had no idea. We're a legitimate company. We'll come remove those posts right now. No charge. And we're refunding the HOA. I appreciate that. Can you send me your invoice?" "Already drafting the email." Mike and his crew arrived within the hour, pulling posts with efficiency, apologizing 3 times. The invoice came before their truck cleared the driveway. $1,200 paid by Prairie Meadows HOA via Victoria's authorization. Barrett forwarded it to Warren, received a response 2 minutes later. She just spent HOA money on criminal mischief. Board members could sue her personally. "Keep this." Garrett Whitmore called that evening, his voice carrying careful neutrality. "Mr. Thornton, this is Garrett Whitmore. I'm on the HOA board. Greenscape just refunded us $1,200 and said Victoria ordered work on your property without authorization. Is that true?" "Completely true. I've got county survey documentation." Silence, then a breath that sounded like a man realizing legal exposure. "Mr. Thornton, most of us on the board had no idea what Victoria was doing. She handles day-to-day operations. We approved $1,200 thinking it was legitimate. I believe you. I'm calling an emergency board meeting. But I need to ask, are you planning to sue the HOA?" Barrett thought about decent people trapped in an organization run by someone who'd weaponized authority. "Garrett, I don't want to sue anybody. I want to farm my corn. But if Victoria keeps coming after me, I'll defend myself. And I'll win." "Understood. And thank you for not pressing charges. A lot of people would have." After hanging up, Barrett walked to the window overlooking Evelyn's garden, now going dormant for winter. Victoria had made 3 critical mistakes in one day, spent HOA money without authorization, committed criminal mischief with witnesses, and lost her board's support. But something else was happening behind the scenes. While Barrett dealt with fence posts, Warren Hayes was digging through county records. And he'd just found something that would change everything. The phone rang at 9:14 on a Tuesday night. "Barrett, you sitting down?" "Yeah, why? I found the smoking gun. And it's bigger than we thought." Warren's voice carried suppressed excitement. "Remember when Cornerstone needed that easement in 2019? I pulled the full development contract tonight. There's a clause buried deep, an indemnification provision." "Meaning what?" "Meaning, if the HOA pursues legal action over property boundaries or spends money on enforcement outside their territory, the developer has to reimburse everything. Every complaint, every dollar Victoria spent, Cornerstone is contractually obligated to pay it back." Barrett sat forward, mind racing. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. It's in the public record filed with the county in 2019. The clause was insurance for Cornerstone against exactly this scenario. Any lawsuit triggers automatic developer responsibility. Does Victoria know? No way. She wasn't here in 2019, and the current board doesn't know either, or they would have stopped her. She's been spending HOA money thinking they're protected, but every dollar comes with a reimbursement obligation. How much are we talking based on documented spending plus harassment you've documented? If this went to court, you'd have a case worth 6 figures. And Cornerstone would pay every penny. Why would they agree to that? Warren's laugh held professional appreciation. Because in 2019 they were desperate for your easement. Without it, their whole development needed different utility routing, probably millions in additional costs. So they protected themselves from future liability by making the HOA think twice. Brilliant legal work. They just bet no HOA would be dumb enough to pick this fight. They didn't count on Victoria. Nobody could have. Barrett stood, walked to the window, looked out at dark fields. The information transformed defensive posture into overwhelming advantage, proved that Evelyn's insistence on the right contract had protected him in ways neither fully understood when she was alive. This was Evelyn's doing, wasn't it? Warren's voice softened. Barrett, your wife researched HOA disputes while she was sick, spent hours reading about boundary conflicts. She told me specifically Barrett will need this after I'm gone. Make it ironclad. She was protecting you from exactly this, even knowing she was dying. The weight settled into Barrett's chest, grief and gratitude mixing until he couldn't separate them. Evelyn had been planning for his survival while facing her own death. So what do I do? You don't have to do anything yet. Just knowing this exists changes the dynamic. When Victoria makes her next move, and she will, that's when we reveal this. Maximum impact. You're enjoying this. 40 years of estate planning, Barrett. This is the most fun I've had since 1997 when I defended a farmer against an EPA wetland designation that turned out to be a seasonal puddle. What happened? We won. The EPA official got transferred. The farmer bought me bourbon so expensive I still haven't opened it. After Warren hung up, Barrett sat in darkness. Evelyn's presence almost tangible in the careful protection she'd constructed in the garden she'd planted in the daughter who'd inherited her strength. Everything had changed. He wasn't just defending property. He was honoring the woman who'd loved him enough to build fortifications against battles she'd never witness. The harvest was 3 weeks away. Victoria would make her move. And when she did, Barrett would be ready. The year that followed moved with the steady rhythm of seasons that had governed farming long before HOA bylaws existed. Victoria stayed quiet through the winter and spring of 2023, contained by board oversight and the legal exposure Warren's discovery had revealed. Barrett planted corn in May, tended it through a summer that brought adequate rain, and watched the stalks grow tall, while Prairie Meadows learned to govern itself with transparency instead of tyranny. Grace visited quarterly, always with Rosalind, sometimes with her husband Mark, and the farmhouse felt less empty with their laughter-filling rooms that had been too quiet since Evelyn died. By October 2023, the fields stood ready for harvest that would test whether Victoria's restraint would hold or whether desperation would drive her to one final catastrophic mistake. November arrived, cold and clear harvest weather that made every farmer in Webster County check equipment and watch forecasts. Barrett spent the first week of the month preparing servicing the combine until it ran smooth, checking every component that could fail. Grace called daily confirming she'd arrived November 15th with camera equipment and Rosalind's endless questions about tractors. The preparation intensified on November 7th when Barrett called Grace Sullivan. Grace, I need official county survey stakes placed every 25 feet along my entire property line. Bright orange flags. GPS coordinates county certification. I want it so visible that anyone claiming confusion looks either dishonest or incompetent. That's going to be expensive, probably $800. I don't care. She spent 6 hours the next day walking his property line with GPS equipment driving stakes into resistant ground. Each stake carried a bright orange flag, a metal tag with coordinates and county certification. When finished, she handed Barrett a USB drive. If anyone questions your property line after this, they're not questioning geography. They're questioning reality. Barrett called Dan Peterson next. Dan, how would you feel about recording my corn harvest from your property? Full documentation, wide angles. Long pause, then recognition. You're setting a trap. I'm farming my land very publicly. If someone wants to make it a problem, I want everything on record. I'm in. November 16th. I'll have 3 cameras running. The call to Deputy Cole Richardson came next. "Deputy, I wanted to give you a heads up. I'm harvesting my south field on November 16th. Given everything with Victoria Ashford, I wanted you to know in case there are issues. Appreciate the notice. You expecting trouble? I'm expecting to farm my corn, but I've learned to prepare." "Understood. I'll make sure patrol swings by." Kate Mitchell answered on the second ring. "Kate, you interested in documenting the conclusion to our HOA war always? What's happening? I'm harvesting my south field November 16th. There's a decent chance Victoria will make a scene. If you want to be there, you're welcome." 9 a.m. "Are you serious?" "Completely." "Barrett, you're either very strategic or very crazy. I'm a farmer. We're used to gambling on weather and prices. This is just another calculated risk." The night before harvest, Barrett walked his property line one final time, boots crunching on frozen ground. Every 25 feet, an orange survey stake glowed in moonlight, 47 markers along the southern boundary, each one a declaration of truth made visible. The combine sat fueled and serviced. Dan's cameras were positioned. Grace was driving down at dawn. Kate Mitchell had confirmed. Deputy Cole would be in area. Everything was ready. Not for war, Barrett had never wanted that. Ready for witness, for documentation, for the moment when Victoria's campaign would collapse under its own desperation. Barrett stood in Evelyn's garden, lavender dormant, but still fragrant, when wind shifted, and felt her presence in the careful preparation, in the legal protection she'd built in the daughter who'd inherited her strength. If Victoria wanted to stop him tomorrow, she'd have to do it in front of everyone. And Barrett would be ready. The land didn't care about HOA bylaws or property disputes. It would still be here long after all of them were gone. But for now, for this harvest, Barrett Thornton would farm it exactly the way his grandfather and father had taught him. Straight rows, steady pace, absolute clarity about what belonged to him and what didn't. Tomorrow would tell whether Victoria had learned the same lesson or whether she'd double down one final time and discover that some battles can't be won through force of will alone. November 16th arrived with frost coating everything in silver, the thermometer reading 38 degrees at 4:47 when Barrett woke 15 minutes before his alarm. The coffee maker burbled to life, and through the window he could see Grace's car already parked in the driveway, his daughter having driven through the night. Grace sat at the kitchen table with camera gear spread across the surface. She looked up when Barrett entered. "Morning, Dad. Rosie's still asleep upstairs. I didn't want to wake her until closer to 9. You didn't have to drive all night?" "Yes, I did. Because today matters." Barrett poured coffee. Added the exact amount of cream Evelyn had always prepared for him. Muscle memory, executing routines that survived the person who'd taught them. Outside, pre-dawn darkness was fading toward gray. By 6 o'clock, Barrett was running final equipment checks, the combine's diesel engine turning over, with that deep rumble that meant everything was functioning. Grain bins, empty header blades, sharp, every hydraulic line tested. Grace photographed the process, documenting preparation as thoroughly as any written log. Roslyn emerged from the farmhouse at 7:30, bundled in a purple coat that matched the lavender garden's summer blooms, her 5-year-old excitement uncontainable. "Grandpa Bear, is this the day we catch the dragon?" "This is the day I harvest corn, sweetheart. Same thing I do every November. But Mommy says the mean lady might try to stop you." Barrett knelt to his granddaughter's eye level. "Some people get confused about what belongs to them and what doesn't. Today I'm just going to show everyone where the real lines are. No dragons, just truth." Dan Peterson called at 7:15, confirming his cameras were positioned and recording. Kate Mitchell arrived at 8:30 with her photographer Marcus. Deputy Cole Richardson pulled up at 8:50, parking his patrol car on the public road shoulder with deliberate visibility. "Everything okay, Mr. Thornton?" "Everything's fine, Deputy. I'm about to farm my land legally. Just wanted you here in case someone disputes geography. I've seen the county surveys. You're good to go." Barrett climbed into the combine cab at 8:55, the leather seat cold through his jacket controls positioned exactly where his hands expected them. He started the engine, felt vibration through the entire machine, and looked out across the south field where 7-foot corn stalks stood dry and ready. the same field his grandfather had planted in 1953. At 9 o'clock exactly, Barrett engaged the header and moved forward. The combine ate into the first row, corn stalks snapping with rhythmic precision, ears rattling up the conveyor, kernels streaming into the grain bin. The sound was mechanical and organic at once, the music of harvest. He was 3 passes in maybe 20 minutes when the white Mercedes appeared. The luxury vehicle came fast down the Prairie Meadows access road, turned onto the county road, pulled onto the shoulder 50 yards from Deputy Cole's patrol car. Victoria Ashford emerged wearing heels completely inappropriate for farmland, her face already set in outrage. Barrett kept harvesting, maintaining steady speed, eyes forward on work that needed doing. Through his side mirror, he watched Victoria approach Cole's vehicle, gesturing toward the field, pointing at Barrett. Cole shook his head, appeared to say something brief. Victoria's gestures became more animated. 4th pass, 5th pass. The combine ran parallel to the property line, now 35 feet from the nearest orange survey stake, completely and obviously on Thornton land. Victoria started walking toward the field. Deputy Cole called out something Barrett couldn't hear over the diesel engine, but Victoria ignored him. She stepped over the fence, walked past orange survey stakes impossible to miss in morning sunlight, and advanced across freshly harvested rows with determination. Barrett stopped, shut off the header, but left the engine running and climbed down. Cold November air hit his face after the warm cab carrying the smell of diesel and fresh-cut corn. Victoria was 30 feet away and closing. "You need to stop. This is HOA land, you're trespassing." Deputy Cole reached her hand on her arm, but not restraining. "Ma'am, you need to leave this property. This is private land belonging to Mr. Thornton. It's community property. I have documentation, ma'am. I've seen the county surveys. This is Mr. Thornton's land. You are currently trespassing." Something broke in Victoria's face, some final barrier between restraint and absolute loss of control. She turned not toward Cole's patrol car, but toward her Mercedes with purpose that made Barrett's stomach drop 1 second before he understood what she intended. Victoria got in the Mercedes, started the engine, and gunned the accelerator straight across the field. The tires threw dirt, the vehicle bouncing over uneven furrows. From the fence line, Grace's voice cut through everything. "Dad, move." Barrett stepped back. Instinct overriding thought, watching Victoria aim her $90,000 Mercedes directly at the combine's right rear wheel with conviction that luxury engineering could move 18,000 pounds of steel. The impact sounded like the world folding in on itself. Metal crumpled with percussive force, fiberglass shattered, airbags detonated with explosive reports that echoed across the field, white powder billowing through the destroyed windshield. The Mercedes accordion folded around the combine's wheel hood, crumpling engine compartment, collapsing steam hissing from ruptured cooling systems. The combine didn't move, didn't even shift. 3 seconds of absolute silence. Then Victoria's door opened, and she stumbled out, airbag powder coating her jacket, mascara, running hair wild, and her voice emerged as something between scream and sob. "You did this. You drove into me. This is HOA land." Deputy Cole was running toward her, radio in hand. "Ma'am, do not move. Are you injured?" Victoria ignored him, started toward Barrett, one heel broken, but still pointing with absolute certainty. "Arrest him. He's trespassing." A second patrol car arrived with sirens cutting through November morning. Sergeant Anna Sullivan emerged with instant assessment. Wrecked Mercedes, undamaged combine woman advancing on farmer who stood still with hands visible, witnesses everywhere. "Ma'am, stop right there." Victoria kept coming. "He needs to be arrested. This is HOA property." Barrett found his voice. "Sergeant, she's on my land. I can show you the survey markers. All 47 of them county certified." By now, people were gathering. Kate Mitchell sprinting closer with her camera. Dan Peterson recording from his property line. Grace holding Rosalind's hand 60 feet back, her daughter's camera steady. At least 15 Prairie Meadows residents on the public road, phones raised. Sergeant Sullivan walked to the nearest survey stake, read the county certification tag, verified GPS coordinates against official records. She walked back. "Ma'am, this is definitively private property belonging to Barrett Thornton. You are trespassing, and 15 witnesses just watched you deliberately crash your vehicle into stationary farm equipment. Victoria's face cycled through emotions too quickly to track white to red to white again, realization penetrating delusion as the gap between what she'd believed and what was actually true became impossible to ignore. That's impossible. I have documentation using county records. These stakes are county certified. You're on private land, and you just committed vehicular assault. Barrett stepped forward, pulled out the folder he'd prepared. County survey from Grace Sullivan with official seals. The 2019 easement agreement. Photographs of the fence posts. Game camera footage of trespassing time-stamped and geotagged. Sergeant Sullivan reviewed everything with methodical attention. Mr. Thornton, how long has this harassment been going on? 18 months. Since June 2022. I've got documentation of 6 false complaints to state agencies, all dismissed. Unauthorized HOA expenditures. And now this. Sullivan turned to Victoria. Ma'am, I'm placing you under arrest for reckless driving, criminal mischief, and trespassing. You have the right to remain silent. What, I'm the victim here? Ma'am. 15 witnesses just watched you deliberately crash your vehicle into stationary equipment on someone else's property. Victoria started crying. Then real tears from the place where reality finally breached carefully constructed certainty. Not manipulative tears or strategic emotion. These were tears of someone watching their entire sense of self collapse, everything they'd believed about their authority crumbling under documentation and witnesses who couldn't be intimidated. As Sullivan walked Victoria toward the patrol car, Garrett Whitmore stepped forward from the crowd, stopping carefully at the property line. Mr. Thornton, I owe you an apology. We all do. Kate Mitchell was there with her microphone. Mr. Thornton. What just happened here? Barrett looked at the wrecked Mercedes, the undamaged combine, the crowd of neighbors. I was harvesting corn on land my family's owned since 1952. Same thing I do every November. Mrs. Ashford claimed this was HOA land. County records say otherwise. Your response to her claims, Barrett pulled out his phone, showed the framed photograph of the $1 bill. In 2019, I gave Cornerstone Homes an easement for $1. The contract stated clearly, easement only, no HOA jurisdiction in perpetuity. It's recorded with the county. Anyone could have checked. Then he delivered the information that would transform local dispute into cautionary tale. Here's what nobody knew. The 2019 contract included a protection clause. If the HOA pursued action over property boundaries, the developer had to reimburse everything. Every dollar Mrs. Ashford spent fighting me Cornerstone was contractually required to pay it back. Garrett Whitmore's face went pale. What? Every complaint, every expense, everything. It was in the original filing public record. My wife researched HOA disputes while she was dying, made our lawyer include that protection. She told him I'd need it after she was gone. Turns out she was right. The weight of that revelation settled across the crowd, transforming the narrative from property dispute into something more complex, a widow's foresight protecting her husband from threats she'd never witness. Garrett turned to other board members visible in the crowd. She spent $19,000 pursuing this. $19,000 that Cornerstone has to pay back because she never verified basic facts. It's in the contract. Always has been. From the patrol car, Victoria heard this, her sobbing intensifying reality, penetrating delusion with particular cruelty. Tim Brennan spoke up. What happens now? Barrett looked at them regular people who'd been misled. That's up to your board. You've got records to review, decisions to make. Me, I'm going back to harvesting my corn. He climbed into the combine, started the header, and resumed work. The diesel roar filled silent stalks, snapping in rhythmic precision exactly the way his grandfather had taught him. Behind him, the crowd dispersed. Kate interviewed Garrett. Deputy Cole measured skid marks. A tow truck arrived for the Mercedes, and Barrett harvested corn straight rows and steady pace. 2 days after the crash, Grace made a phone call that would change the trajectory of everything that followed. She'd been researching Victoria's background using her journalist contacts and public records access, trying to understand what drove someone to such desperate action. What she discovered made her pick up the phone. "Dad, I found something about Victoria. Her medical records are sealed, but I talked to someone who knew her in California. 6 years of IVF treatments. $90,000. Every cycle failed. The marriage fell apart around the 4th miscarriage." Barrett was quiet, absorbing information that recontextualized everything. She moved here to start over, found herself in a subdivision full of families she'd never have. Then she saw our farm, 3 generations, your kids, Evie's garden, everything she couldn't have reflected back at her. That doesn't excuse what she did. No, but it explains it. And Dad, I've been thinking about what Mom would do. She'd see a broken person, not just an enemy. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we consider what restorative justice might look like. Not for Victoria's sake, for ours, for Rosie. So she learns that understanding someone's pain doesn't mean letting them hurt you, but it might mean helping them heal after you've stopped them. 3 weeks later, the legal proceedings unfolded. Victoria pleaded guilty to reckless driving, criminal mischief, and trespassing. The sentence included 6 months suspended jail time, 100 hours community service, $15,000, restitution, permanent restraining order, and 3 years probation. But there was an unusual addition to the sentencing, something Grace had quietly worked on with Victoria's public defender in the judge's office. 25 hours of Victoria's community service would be conducted at Thornton Farm under Grace's supervision, focused on understanding agricultural operations. The goal wasn't punishment, it was education. Barrett agreed with specific conditions. Grace would supervise. Victoria would have no farmhouse access, and she could be removed immediately if problematic. Victoria resigned from HOA presidency before formal removal. Her house went on the market the following week. Richard filed for divorce, the paperwork appearing in public records confirming what everyone suspected. The emergency HOA election happened mid-December. Garrett Whitmore won the presidency on a platform of transparency. His first actions included bylaw amendments prohibiting officers from spending over $1,000 without board vote, mandating quarterly financial reports, and requiring 75% member approval for legal action. Cornerstone honored the indemnification clause without argument, their legal department cutting a check for $19,000. The developer's attorney called Barrett personally to apologize. "I appreciate you honoring the contract. No hard feelings." The board voted to sue Victoria personally for unauthorized expenditure, a claim that settled for $12,000 on a payment plan. By January, Prairie Meadows had transformed from subdivision run by autocrat into community managed by people who'd learned that reading documents mattered. The first day Victoria appeared for community service was a cold Saturday in late January. She arrived in a sensible sedan that replaced the destroyed Mercedes, wearing jeans and boots that looked new. Grace met her at the property line with clipboard and Evelyn's no-nonsense expression. "You're here to work, not socialize. You're here to learn, not argue. You speak respectfully or you leave. Understood?" Victoria nodded, her face carrying genuine humiliation. "I understand, and I'm sorry for everything." Grace led her to the barn where equipment maintenance was in progress. Barrett watched from a distance, not interfering but present enough to establish this was his land, his legacy. Over the following weeks, something shifted. Victoria arrived on time, worked without complaint, asked questions that suggested genuine curiosity. Grace showed her the lavender garden, explained each plant Evelyn had chosen and why. Victoria's face cracked when understanding penetrated that she'd called this memorial agricultural blight. "Your mother must have been remarkable." She was. "And she would have wanted you to heal, not just suffer. Why are you being kind to me after everything?" "Because my mother taught me that everyone deserves a second chance, but only if they're willing to learn from the first one." The transformation wasn't dramatic. It was gradual and imperfect, involved setbacks when Victoria's defensive pride reasserted itself. But by the time her 25 hours concluded in early March, something had changed. Victoria knew the difference between a combine and a riding mower, understood organic certification, could identify lavender varieties by leaf structure. Her final day coincided with the first warm afternoon of approaching spring. Grace and Victoria worked side by side, preparing beds for the growing season, pulling dead stalks and turning softening soil. "Can I come back sometimes?" "Not for service hours. Just to help in the garden. Once a month, spring through fall." Grace looked at Barrett, who'd been watching from the porch. He nodded once. "Once a month. You work, you learn, you respect the property. And if you ever claim 1 inch of this land as anything other than ours, you're done. Forever." "I understand. Thank you." April brought full bloom of Evelyn's garden for the 4th spring since she'd planted it, purple and silver waves that drew bees and butterflies. Barrett tended it with the care she'd taught him. Understanding the garden was never about flowers, but about continuing to show up for someone who could no longer show up herself. One afternoon in mid-April, Barrett's phone rang with an unexpected number. He answered warily. "Mr. Thornton, this is Richard Ashford. I know I have no right to call, but I needed you to know something. I told Victoria to stop. Multiple times. I'm sorry I wasn't stronger. I'm sorry I enabled her by staying silent." The apology hung in the air for a moment. "I appreciate you calling. That takes courage. She's getting help now. Real help. Therapy and fertility support group. The divorce was necessary, but I hope she finds peace. So do I." After hanging up, Barrett felt something release in his chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but the beginning of understanding that Victoria's war against him had always been a proxy for battles she was fighting with herself. The Sarah Morrison Memorial Scholarship launched in May, funded through settlement money and careful savings. The endowment specifically targeted women entering agriculture or environmental science, honoring Evelyn's belief that farms benefited when everyone had opportunity. The first recipient was Rebecca Townsend, 17 years old, daughter of a single mother planning to study agricultural engineering. The award ceremony happened on Thornton land in the lavender garden. 50 people gathered while Rebecca explained her vision for sustainable farming practices. Mrs. Thornton never met me, but her legacy gave me a future. Her husband taught me that land isn't just property, it's story. I want to help other families keep their land, their stories, their gardens. Barrett watched from beside Grace and Rosalind, his granddaughter old enough now to understand that Grandma's garden had become something larger. Victoria stood in the back, quiet and respectful, no longer the HOA president who'd claimed false authority, but simply a volunteer who'd learned that showing up mattered more than being in charge. After the ceremony, Victoria approached Barrett tentatively. "I wanted to say something I should have said months ago. I'm sorry. Not because I got caught, but because I was wrong. About everything. Your wife built something beautiful and I tried to destroy it because I was angry about things that had nothing to do with you." Barrett looked at her, seeing not enemy but person who'd been drowning. "Evelyn used to say everyone's fighting battles nobody else can see. Your battles don't excuse what you did, but understanding them helps me remember you're human, not monster." "Can I ask what would have happened if she was still alive when I moved here?" "She probably would have invited you to lunch, shown you the farm, and made absolutely clear where the boundaries were. Then she'd have made you feel welcome within them. That was her gift, making people feel seen while also making them understand limits." "I wish I'd known her." "Me too. But you can honor her by learning what she would have taught. That boundaries matter. That community requires respect. That having power means knowing when not to use it." Victoria nodded, understanding purchase through consequences transforming into growth. November returned with harvest weather. Grace and Rosalind came down for the weekend family tradition now established. The combine worked perfectly, the same machine Victoria had struck, showing only a small dent. Barrett had decided not to repair a memorial to the day delusion met immovable truth. Prairie Meadows had transformed over the year. Garrett's leadership created transparency, his quarterly reports showing exactly how funds were spent. The Good Neighbor Harvest Festival became annual tradition, Barrett and Dan co-hosting, while residents came to understand farming. Children climbed into combine cabs, produce sold at cost, funded the food bank. Grace Sullivan gave workshops on property rights, teaching people to verify boundaries. Victoria attended, working quietly at the food distribution table, no longer seeking control, but apparently content with participation. Some residents still avoided her memory too fresh, but others accepted her transformation as genuine, recognizing people could change. Thanksgiving brought the fullest test of reconciliation. Grace proposed it during a phone call in early November. "Dad, I'm thinking about inviting Victoria to Thanksgiving, just for dinner. What do you think?" Barrett sat in Evelyn's garden, lavender dormant again but still fragrant. "Your mother would say everyone deserves a seat at the table, especially people who've been eating alone." "So that's a yes. That's a yes. But you extend the invitation. Make it clear she's welcome, but not entitled. Guest, not family." The invitation went out. Victoria accepted with genuine gratitude. Thanksgiving Day arrived cold and clear, with the smell of roasting turkey filling the farmhouse where 4 generations had celebrated harvests. The gathering included family: Grace, Mark, Roslyn, who was now 6. Callan made it home from California with his girlfriend. Dan Peterson came with his daughter. Warren Hayes arrived with his wife bearing pies. Kate Mitchell stopped by briefly. Garrett and Claire represented Prairie Meadows' transformation, and Victoria arriving last with wine and visible uncertainty. Barrett met her at the door. "Come in. You're welcome here." The meal was ordinary and extraordinary at once. Food shared, stories told, laughter rising. Roslyn dominated conversation with kindergarten politics, her innocent narration breaking tension. After dinner, Barrett suggested a photograph in Evelyn's garden despite November cold. Grace organized the group. Victoria hung back. "I shouldn't be in the family photo. I'm not family." Grace looked at her father, reading his expression. "You're part of this story now. Mom would have wanted you here." Victoria's eyes filled. "Your mother must have been a saint." Barrett stepped forward. "No, not a saint. Just a woman who chose kindness over anger every single day, who understood everyone's fighting battles. Nobody else can see who believed broken people could heal if someone showed them a different way. She'd want me to do the same." They gathered in the garden, 40 people crowded among dormant lavender stalks. Grace triggered the camera timer. The photo captured what words couldn't: community built from conflict, relationships formed through consequences, and grace proof that people could survive attempts to destroy them and still choose mercy. After everyone left, after the farmhouse returned to quiet, Barrett had learned to inhabit. He stood alone in the garden as November sunset painted the sky. The smell of lavender soap drifted from somewhere: memory or ghost or magic of places where love had been concentrated. Barrett touched the frozen soil where Evelyn had planted bulbs while dying. "You were right, Evie. About the garden, about the contract, about Victoria needing healing instead of just punishment. Lavender means devotion and calm and forgiveness." "I hear you, love. I'm listening." The land would outlast all of them, would still be growing corn long after Barrett joined Evelyn. But for now, Thornton Farm stood as evidence that truth, documented thoroughly enough, couldn't be obscured, that communities healed when people chose grace over grudges, that legacy meant more than acres and dollars, but included lessons taught and mercy shown, and the way you loved people even after they were gone. The $1 bill still hung in the kitchen beside wedding photos, Evelyn's final gift that had protected him exactly as she'd planned. Best investment he'd ever made. Best woman he'd ever known. The garden bloomed every spring. The land fed people. Rebecca Townsend studied agricultural engineering on Evelyn's scholarship. Victoria volunteered at the food bank and tended lavender, and maybe possibly was learning that purpose came from service rather than control. And Barrett Thornton farmed his corn: straight rows and steady pace, honoring the dead by doing the work they'd taught him mattered. Not a saint, just a woman who chose kindness over anger every single day. That line would echo through Webster County for years to come, repeated by people who'd learned that the strongest legacy isn't what you take with you, but what you leave behind for others to tend. 5 years later, November 2028. The lavender garden had grown beyond anything Evelyn could have imagined when she planted those first bulbs, with hands already trembling from illness. What started as 20 feet of grosso and phenomenal varieties now stretched 40 feet along the south fence, With new beds, Barrett had added each spring Russian sage catmint and 3 varieties of oregano that the bees favored. A weathered wooden bench sat at the garden's center, carved with words Evelyn had written in a letter Barrett found, tucked inside her seed catalog 2 years after she died. Tend what matters. Love outlasts us all. Barrett Thornton stood beside that bench on a November morning in 2028, 57 years old, now his hair more salt than pepper, but his hands still steady on the shovel handle. Grace worked beside him, 33 and 7 months pregnant with her second child, moving more slowly than she used to, but with the same determined efficiency she'd inherited from her mother. Rosalind, 11 years old now, and insisting everyone call her Rosie, only when she was in trouble, knelt in the soil installing spring bulbs with the careful attention of someone who'd learned early that tending living things required patience more than speed. The farm hadn't changed much in 5 years, which was exactly how Barrett preferred it. Same fields, same barn with the paint he still hadn't updated, same gravel driveway that Prairie Meadows residents no longer complained about because they'd learned that working farms looked different from subdivision lawns, and both had their place. What had changed was harder to see, but impossible to miss once you knew to look for it. The way the fence line between Thornton Land and Prairie Meadows had transformed from boundary of conflict into meeting place of community. The way harvest festivals now drew 300 people instead of 50. The way Rebecca Townsend's name appeared in agricultural journals with increasing frequency, her research on sustainable farming practices cited by universities across the Midwest. And the way Victoria Ashford, now Victoria Brennan, after remarrying a retired teacher she'd met in an Arizona gardening club, drove up from Scottsdale twice a year to spend a week volunteering in the garden her rage had once tried to destroy. Grace straightened from the bulb, planting one hand supporting her lower back, the other resting on the curve where Barrett's second grandchild grew toward spring arrival. "Dad, you're thinking too loud. I can hear the gears turning from here. Just remembering. Your mother would have loved seeing this. She does see it. Every purple bloom, every bee that visits every person who learns something here. Mom's still teaching, just in a different way." Barrett nodded, not trusting his voice. 7 years since Evelyn died, and grief still arrived in waves less frequent now, but no less real when they came. He'd learned to ride them, let them wash through without resistance, because fighting grief was like fighting the weather, pointless and exhausting. Rosie looked up from her bulb installation, soil smudging one cheek. "Grandpa, is it true Miss Rebecca is coming today and bringing her fiancé True? Should be here around 1. Rosie's excitement was immediate and uncontained. "I want to show her the research project I did on cover crops. She's the reason I want to study agriculture. Well, her and you. And great-grandma Evelyn, even though I never met her." Grace caught Barrett's eye, both of them recognizing Evelyn's legacy cascading through generations in ways neither could have predicted. Rosie didn't just want to study agriculture she'd announced last month. Her intention to take over Thornton Farm someday, the first of the 4th generation to express interest in continuing what Evelyn and Barrett had built. Your great-grandmother would have been proud. She believed farms needed young people with new ideas and old values. What's the difference? New ideas are about better methods. Old values are about why the work matters. Growing food to feed people, not just to make money. Taking care of land, so it's healthier when you pass it on. Understanding that what you do now affects people you'll never meet. Rosie absorbed this with the seriousness of someone much older. Like how great-grandma planted this garden for you even though she knew she'd never see it bloom exactly like that. Rebecca Townsend arrived at 1:15, driving a sensible truck that carried soil samples and equipment in the bed, her fiancé Thomas beside her, a quiet man who taught high school biology and shared her passion for sustainable agriculture. She'd grown in the 5 years since accepting the first Sarah Morrison Memorial Scholarship, completing her undergraduate degree in agricultural engineering at Nebraska, now halfway through her master's program, while consulting with small farms on conservation practices. Rebecca hugged Barrett with the easy familiarity of someone who'd become honorary family through dedication more than blood. "Mr. Thornton, the farm looks beautiful. How's the soil regeneration project going?" "Better than expected. The cover crop rotation you suggested increased organic matter by 2%. I'll show you the test results. They walked the fields while Thomas and Grace talked about native plant propagation, Rosie trailing behind taking notes in a journal she'd decorated with pressed flowers from Evelyn's garden. The November air carried the smell of earth preparing for winter rest, and the conversation flowed with the comfortable rhythm of people who spoke the same language of land stewardship and multi-generational thinking. As they returned to the farmhouse, a familiar sedan pulled into the driveway. Victoria emerged looking different than she had 5 years ago. Softer somehow, the rigid control that had once defined her replaced by something that resembled peace. Her husband Michael followed a gentleman in his 60s who'd lost his own first wife to Alzheimer's and understood grief's long half-life. Victoria approached cautiously despite 5 years of monthly visits, still carrying some awareness that her presence here was gift not right. "I hope it's okay we came early." Michael wanted to see the garden before we headed to the community center. Barrett gestured toward the lavender beds. "Garden's open to anyone willing to work." Victoria smiled, tension releasing from her shoulders, and moved toward the beds where Grace directed her to winter preparation tasks. Michael introduced himself to Rebecca and Thomas, and within minutes the diverse group was working together. Former adversary scholarship recipient family members and strangers, united by dirt under fingernails and shared purpose. Rosie watched it all with the observant attention of someone cataloging human behavior for future reference. "Grandpa, how did you forgive Miss Victoria?" After everything she did, Barrett considered the question, wanting to give his granddaughter truth rather than platitude. "I didn't forgive her all at once. First I had to stop her from hurting me. Then I had to understand why she was hurting. Then your mom helped me see that understanding someone's pain doesn't mean letting them continue causing yours, but it might mean helping them heal after you've protected yourself." The forgiveness came slowly, piece by piece, as she showed through actions that she'd changed. "But weren't you angry?" "For a long time, yes. But your great-grandma Evelyn used to say that anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die." Victoria was already poisoning herself with her own anger. I didn't need to add mine to the mix. So forgiveness is about you, not her. Forgiveness is about both. It freed her from shame she'd earned, but was ready to put down. And it freed me from anger I was carrying that had nowhere useful to go. Rosie wrote this in her journal, underlining certain words for emphasis, and Barrett recognized Evelyn's teaching style coming through him into the next generation. The community center event that evening was something new. Garrett Whitmore's idea to create annual celebration, recognizing people who'd contributed to building bridges between prairie meadows and surrounding farms. The subdivision had transformed significantly in 5 years, its HOA now model of transparency and community engagement rather than enforcement and exclusion. Garrett's leadership had created programs where subdivision residents volunteered on local farms during harvest, where farmers gave workshops on food systems, where children from McMansions and children from farmhouses attended the same agricultural summer camps. The center's main room was decorated with photographs documenting the transformation: Barrett's combine on harvest day 5 years ago, orange survey stakes marking truth, the wrecked Mercedes that had become local legend. But also newer images. Community garden plots where Victoria taught composting classes, children gathering eggs from Barrett's chickens. Prairie Meadows residents in Thornton Fields learning to identify soil health indicators. Kate Mitchell stood at the podium, her journalism career having evolved from local reporting to documentary filmmaking. She'd produced a short film about the incident and its aftermath that had won regional awards and sparked conversations about HOA governance across the country. 5 years ago, I covered what looked like a simple property dispute. What I actually witnessed was a community learning the difference between authority and power, between control and leadership, between punishment and restoration. The reason we're here tonight isn't to celebrate one person, but to recognize that healing requires everyone's participation. She called names: Garrett for reforming HOA governance, Grace Sullivan for her property rights education workshops, Dan Peterson for opening his farm to school groups, Claire Whitmore for establishing the Neighborhood Farm Liaison Committee, Tim Brennan for pro bono construction work helping farms improve infrastructure. And then she called Victoria's name. The room went quiet, attention shifting to where Victoria sat with Michael, her face showing surprise and uncertainty. Victoria Brennan has contributed over 500 volunteer hours at Thornton Farm, the food bank and community gardens in the past 5 years. She's taught composting, organic pest management, and soil science to over 200 residents. She's written a guidebook on sustainable urban gardening that's being used by HOAs across Nebraska. Her journey from antagonist to advocate reminds us that people can change when given both consequences and compassion. Victoria walked to the podium with visible emotion, accepting a plaque she clearly hadn't expected. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who'd traveled a long distance to arrive at this moment. 5 years ago, I stood in a courtroom accepting responsibility for the worst things I'd ever done. I destroyed an expensive car, but more importantly, I almost destroyed my own humanity through obsession with control I had no right to exercise. Barrett Thornton had every reason to ensure I faced maximum punishment. Instead, he and his daughter Grace offered me something I didn't deserve, a chance to learn rather than just suffer. She paused, composing herself. I learned that healthy boundaries protect everyone, that community requires respecting what isn't yours to control, that the emptiness I was trying to fill through HOA authority could only be healed by addressing the grief I'd been avoiding. I learned that farms aren't blight, they're the reason cities can exist. And I learned that some people choose kindness even when you've given them every reason to choose otherwise. She looked directly at Barrett. Thank you for showing me that grace is stronger than revenge, and that understanding someone's brokenness doesn't mean accepting their bad behavior, but it might mean helping them become whole after you've stopped them from breaking others. The applause was genuine, sustained, carrying recognition that redemption earned through consistent action deserved acknowledgement even when forgiveness had been hard-won. After the ceremony, smaller groups gathered in conversation clusters. Rebecca found Victoria examining photographs of Evelyn's garden through the seasons. "Mrs. Brennan, can I ask you something?" "Of course. What made you actually change? I've studied conflict resolution, and most people in your position just move away and blame others. What was different?" Victoria considered the question with the thoughtfulness of someone who'd examined her own transformation from every angle. 3 things. First, consequences that matched the harm I faced, real punishment, not just scolding. Second, grace, supervising my community service showed me agricultural work wasn't what I thought it was. I'd called it blight without understanding what farming actually required. And third, watching Barrett tend his wife's garden with such devotion made me realize I'd been attacking someone's memorial to a woman who'd never hurt me. That shame was unbearable until I channeled it into learning. She touched one photograph showing purple lavender in full bloom. But honestly, the turning point was when Rosie, she was 6, then picked lavender and gave it to me, saying, "Grandpa says these flowers mean forgiveness, and you probably need some." A 6-year-old child offering grace to someone who'd tried to hurt her grandfather broke something in me that needed breaking. Rebecca smiled. "I've noticed that children often teach adults more than we teach them, Mrs. Thornton." Evelyn understood that. Her scholarship didn't just fund my education. It funded a value system that prioritizes soil health and community benefit over maximum extraction. She's still teaching through that legacy. That's the goal, to matter after you're gone by what you set in motion. The evening ended with informal gathering at Thornton Farm. 15 people crowded into the farmhouse living room, where Evelyn's presence still lingered in furniture choices and wall decorations, and the particular way light fell through windows she'd cleaned weekly until she couldn't anymore. Barrett made coffee while Grace orchestrated food distribution. Rosie collected coats, and conversations flowed with the easy rhythm of people who'd learned to be comfortable together despite complicated history. Michael Brennan found Barrett in the kitchen. "Mr. Thornton, I want you to know what your mercy meant. Victoria was drowning when I met her 2 years ago, still doing the therapy, still volunteering, but carrying shame so heavy she could barely breathe. Knowing she was welcome here, that you'd let her make amends through action rather than just apology, gave her back her humanity. That's a gift beyond measure. I didn't do it alone. My daughter Grace saw something in Victoria I couldn't see yet. and my wife Evelyn left instructions in a letter about choosing understanding over anger. May I ask what the letter said? Barrett hesitated, then pulled out his wallet. Inside was a small square of paper worn soft from 5 years of carrying, covered in Evelyn's handwriting. He'd found it tucked into her seed catalog 2 years after she died, labeled, "For when someone makes you angry." He read aloud, "Barrett, you're reading this because someone hurt you and you're deciding how to respond. Remember, hurt people hurt people. Anger is valid, but revenge is poison. Protect yourself first always. But if protecting yourself means destroying them, ask whether that destruction serves any purpose beyond satisfying your pain. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop someone from hurting you, then offer them a path to become better. Not for their sake, for yours. Because living with bitterness diminishes you, and I didn't love you for 30 years to watch you become smaller after I'm gone. Choose the bigger version of yourself. I'll be proud of you either way, but I hope you'll be proud of you too. Forever yours, Evie." The kitchen was quiet except for distant conversation from the living room and the coffee maker's gentle burble. "Your wife was a remarkable woman." She was. "And she's still teaching me." Later that night, after everyone had left and Grace had taken sleeping Rosie upstairs to her old bedroom, Barrett stood in the lavender garden under a sky crowded with stars that Evelyn used to identify by name. The November cold bit through his jacket, but he didn't mind the discomfort, feeling appropriate for a moment of reckoning with how far everything had traveled since that terrible morning when Mercedes met Combine. Footsteps approached from behind Grace, moving carefully in pregnancy's final trimester. "You did good, Dad. Mom would be proud." "Think so, I know so. You could have let Victoria suffer and felt justified. Instead, you let her heal and everyone benefited." "That's exactly what Mom would have done. I had help. You saw something in her I couldn't, because I watched you after Mom died, saw how grief made you brittle sometimes, how working the land brought you back. Victoria was drowning in different grief, childlessness, failed marriage, lost purpose. When I researched her background and learned about the IVF failures, I saw someone who needed the same thing you needed. Meaningful work, and someone who believed healing was possible." They stood in silence, watching stars breathing air that smelled like dormant lavender and approaching winter. "I'm scared sometimes, that I'm not teaching Rosie the right things, that I'm too soft when I should be firm, too firm when I should be soft." Grace took his hand. "Dad, Rosie wants to be a farmer. In 2028, when most kids want to be influencers or tech entrepreneurs, your granddaughter wants to grow food and care for soil. You're teaching her exactly right. Your mother did that. Not me. You're still doing it. Every day, every choice. You show Rosie that land matters, that legacy means responsibility, that mercy and boundaries can coexist. She'll carry that forward when it's her turn. If she still wants to farm when she's 18, she will. Because she's seen what it means, not just the work, but the purpose. And she's seen you choose the harder right thing over the easier wrong thing enough times to know what kind of person she wants to become." The baby kicked, visible even through Grace's jacket, and she laughed. "This one's going to be a handful. Already protesting bedtime. Boy or girl? We're not finding out. Want it to be a surprise like when you and Mom had us? Evelyn would like that." They walked back to the farmhouse together, 3 generations under one roof for the night, and Barrett felt Evelyn's presence in the particular quality of peace that came from doing difficult things with grace and watching the results ripple outward in ways you couldn't control but could witness with gratitude. Tomorrow Rebecca would return to her research. Victoria would drive back to Arizona carrying lavender cuttings to plant in her desert garden. Garrett would continue reforming HOA governance one policy at a time. Grace would return to Chicago with Rosie, both of them already planning their next visit. And Barrett would wake at dawn, make coffee the way Evelyn had taught him, and tend the land that had held his family for 3 generations, and would hold the 4th if Rosie's determination proved as strong as her great-grandmother's. The lavender garden slept under November's stars, dormant but not dead, waiting for spring to prove again that what we plant with love outlasts us, grows beyond us, feeds people we'll never meet, but whose lives are nevertheless touched by choices we made in our own season of bloom and fade. Evelyn had planted bulbs while dying, understanding that devotion meant showing up even when you wouldn't see the results. Barrett had chosen mercy when revenge was easier, understanding that what you build matters more than what you destroy. And Rosie would carry it forward, tending both the land and the values, learning that the strongest legacy isn't what you take with you, but what you leave behind for others to grow. Not a saint, just a woman who chose kindness over anger every single day. The words were carved on Evelyn's bench, painted on the barn wall, and whispered by the lavender when wind moved through it just right. And in them a whole community had learned that grace was stronger than revenge, that understanding someone's brokenness didn't mean accepting their bad behavior, and that sometimes the most radical thing you could do was forgive someone who'd tried to destroy you, then teach them how to build instead. 5 years after the crash, the garden bloomed more vibrantly than ever. And Evelyn's legacy, the real one, not measured in acres or dollars, but in lives touched and communities healed, and children who learned that mercy and boundaries could coexist, continued to grow in soil she'd prepared, with hands that trembled but never stopped working, with a heart that loved even when dying, with a faith that what we tend with devotion outlasts us all.